Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Playground to Premiership, episode 7. We're back at the John Allen Suite at Walsall Olympic, and we have definitely our most decorated guest so far. Keith Gillespie has just flew in from Ireland to be our very special guest. I think many people know Keith started his career at Man United, onto Newcastle, Blackburn, Leicester, Sheffield United, to name many more, and had over 80 caps as a Northern Ireland international. So, Keith, it's an absolute pleasure you've come to join us, and thank you, and welcome to P2P.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No, it's been, obviously, we've talked a lot already, from picking you up at the airport and previous connections. Obviously, I've met you at least one event, but I think I told you the premise of why we started Playground to Premiership, Keith, was Ace Academy. As you know, we've been running 10 years, September. We have lots of children now under sort of our stewardship, and we've got a wider reach with social media and hopefully a few good contacts like yourself. So we wanted to do Playground to Premiership to hopefully give people an interesting insight to people like yourself, but also give a little bit of guidance, hopefully, on the journey as a young player, a Premiership player as you were, an international, and now obviously you're an agent to lots of young and established aspiring players. So hopefully that's what we'll delve into and get along the way. But we always bring it back, and to start, as a young kid in Northern Ireland, when did your passion start, Keith, for football, and how did your journey start?
Like most kids, you know, you're kicking a ball about from a very, very young age. 7, 8, whatever. I mean, my first sort of memories of football, I was born in 75, but my first memories of football was probably 81 Cup final.
Right.
Ricky Villa.
Yeah.
And then I especially remember 82 when Northern Ireland beating Spain in the World Cup. So it was there from a very, very young age. You go to school and you get into the school football team, and people start sort of saying you're quite decent, and that just leads on to getting more and more interested in football. I went to when I actually left primary school to go to grammar school. The school I went to then didn't play football, so that became a bit of a problem for me. They were a rugby school, but thankfully I stuck at the football. As a 13-year-old, I was spotted playing then, and went to on trial to Man United, and the rest is history, really.
I mean, you just mentioned a couple of good points. We always say that sort of nature versus nurture. Is there football blood in your family, or is there other people, or was it just a love yourself? And the other question is, was it quite obvious quite early that you had an ability to play football?
I mean, my dad played football, but not to a high level at home. But I suppose I got into football because of him. He was a Man United fan. But I mean, you don't really know yourself how good you are at that age. I suppose when you're at primary school or whatever, and your people are saying you're the best player in the team and stuff. You think, oh yeah, I'm decent enough, but you don't know yourself how good you are. You're still very, very young, and it's important, I suppose, as you get that little bit older and people are still talking about you. It's important, that you don't get ahead of yourself.
Yeah.
You're not cocky with it or anything like that. But I suppose going as a 13-year-old to Man United, it's very, very young, and the trial that I went on, I didn't actually think I did that well at the trial, but I suppose, I think with going to clubs, it's not just, you obviously have to have ability, but they look at other things, and I suppose I'm like quite a quiet character, and I think I would like to say I've got a good temperament, and very level-headed, and they do look at stuff like that. But when you're that age, you don't think of that. You think, oh, I don't think I did well. But after the week, the manager called me in and said, yeah, they wanted to sign me, so it was a no-brainer then. I signed schoolboy forms, and then as a 16-year-old, you've got that guaranteed apprenticeship to go over and try and make it.
And how did that trial come about? Is it like a man you had scouts in Northern Ireland watching games?
Yeah, well, I mean, they had what's called a School of Excellence in in Northern Ireland, and that was like every Wednesday night, and just sort of maybe the best players around, Northern Ireland. So I would have went there every Wednesday night for an hour's training, and the scouts would have been there every week and just came to me and said, I want to send you over. So, being a Man United fan as a kid, obviously my dad was delighted with that as well. So it was just a great opportunity for me then to go. Although nerve-wracking and me saying I didn't do that well, it was great for me then. That they actually signed me, but I knew then that I was better than what I actually showed them.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen Cook, I mentioned him to you driving here, always said to me, not say a little bit different, he's very well known in these parts as sort of one of the best young kids was ever around. And he always said to me that his dad had said, well, let's see where you're at when you get to the counter. Mm-hmm. And then let's see where you are when you go to Lilleshall.
Yeah.
So like you say, if you go to United and think, well, right, I wasn't fully at my capability, but I know I belong here.
Yeah.
Then it's a good thing to know, isn't it?
Exactly.
And do you know when you travelled at 13? Because like you say, I mean, 13 is still young. And you went for a week. Did your mum and dad stay for the whole week, or did you travel alone?
I travelled alone. As a 13-year-old.
On the flight on your own? Or,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very different now where, young kids at a young age, they have to have a parent with them.
Yeah.
But no, I travelled alone and, just
was that put you in digs for the week?
Yep,
or?
I was in digs for the week and, it's up to you. And in fact, no, the first time that I went, we were like in halls.
Yeah, okay.
So with, anybody else from around the UK who was on trial also. So, I think it's crazy now that I actually did travel on my own because, I worry about my daughters even traveling last week and they're 15 and 17.
Yeah.
And I'm not totally happy with them traveling on their own, but as a 13-year-old, I mean, you just sort of got used to that because from the ages of 13 to 16, I would have travelled over, Easter holidays.
So every break you had in school was you was into United.
Yeah, summer
working.
Holidays, and then from that sort of last year at school, occasionally I would have flown over on a Friday night to play for the B team on the Saturday morning and then fly back Saturday afternoon, so that was sort of, them preparing me for actually moving over full time when I was 16.
And what was the team that so I read actually in the book, he never bought you your blazer, did he, when you represented somewhere the school that was a rugby?
Yeah, well, it was Northern the Schoolboy International under 15.
Right.
So, I think I was probably the only one that, went to a school that didn't play football. So, I mean, it was a big thing, to be representing Northern Irish schoolboys. But yeah, my school was the only one that refused to buy the blazer for me, which is, crazy looking back on it.
And when you were playing, so obviously Man U've got a real sort of, like they're keeping a look on your progression. When you come back to Ireland, could you just play free with who you played for, like your Sunday team? Or?
Yeah, I mean, Sunday football, it was never anything like Sunday football. We always played on Saturdays, back home Saturday mornings. So I was just playing for the team that I'd played for from when I was maybe 12 years of age, all the way up to under 15. And then it was arranged when I was in the last year before moving across that I would sign for Linfield and play for Linfield youth team just for that last year.
For your development?
For my development, yeah. That was just sorted out by Man United and that was a year's contract and then I was away.
So what age, in terms of that development, did you actually leave home, sign for United?
I left when I was I turned 16 in February and then left in July. So just not long after my 16th birthday. So
when did they? Who delivered the news you were going to get a scholarship? Was it all the way to Sir Alex then?
No, yeah. Well, I knew when I signed, you had to sign schoolboy forms when you were 14.
Right.
So although I'd being when I was 13, it was agreed that I was going to do it. But the apprenticeship was agreed when I signed as a schoolboy.
Right.
That I was going when I was 16.
Even with the size of Man United, was Sir Alex Ferguson involved at that young age for you that early?
Yeah. Even when I went over as a 14-year-old to sign the contract, the club were playing Middlesbrough on the Saturday. My mum and dad and myself travelled over on the Friday. And that Friday night we went out for food with Alex Ferguson and his wife, and then went to the game the next day and before the game to meet the players and what have you. So yeah, Alex Ferguson was massively involved with everything. You know, he was one of those who knew everything about you, your family, what school you went to, just everything about you. And that's what probably made him a great manager, you know.
Yeah.
You know, you wouldn't expect him to know stuff like that, but that was the way he was with everyone, and he knew anybody, you know, from you know, the tea lady all the way up. He just knew everything and knew everybody's name.
Oh, brilliant. And with your dad being a Red, being a United, that must have been a really proud moment.
Oh, of course, yeah. You know, he was a Man United fan as a kid because of, you know, George Best, obviously being from Northern Ireland, and like many people from Northern Ireland of that era, that a lot would have been United fans because of the George Best link. So, yeah, no, he was delighted, but you know, it's, you know, yourself as a 16-year-old getting an apprenticeship, you know, there is a long way to go.
Yeah, and that was obviously quite a decorated youth team, and you said you've got that sort of apprenticeship, what's known as a scholarship now. When you were 13, obviously most of the class of 92, which we'll get to, were local lads, but obviously there was yourself from Northern Ireland, there was David Beckham from London. When you used to travel in on those trips from 13 to 16, was Beckham already in the programme like yourself?
Yeah, all those players, you know, so when you went for school holidays, Easter, summer, they were always there, you know, so we did sort of know each other from, although we only became apprentices at the same time, in the July 91, we had known each other from sort of 13, 14, travelling, you know, for school holidays, and occasionally, you know, when I mentioned that you would be flown over to play in a B team game or whatever, you know, sometimes I would play in the B team game and be flying over, and other times Beckham would have been travelling from London, the same thing.
And the competition thing to United then, so what years are we talking? 1991 when you signed your scholarship?
Yeah, 1991.
There must have been kids coming from all over the country to get, 22 places? How many got in the youth team then?
Well, yeah, you obviously, with the youth team, you know, that was sort of first and second year apprentices. So, you know, you probably had, you know, 22 to 25 players, maybe more than that, maybe 30 odd.
Right, okay.
You know, and obviously, you know, not everyone can get in it, but you know, as first year apprentices, you know, because it's always talked about, even still, the class of 92, we were sort of a special year.
Yeah.
You know, and you only have to look at the players who came through that system, and you know, the longevity of some of those players at Man United alone, with Scholesy and Gary Neville, and you know, Ryan Giggs, Nicky Butt was there a long time. You know, so it was sort of a bit of a freak that year. You know, you don't get, you know, that's not normal.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at the history of some clubs with youth players coming through, you know, you occasionally get one or two that really go on, but to have as many, you know, of that age group was crazy.
So was Ryan a year above? Then there would have been you, Nicky, Paul Scholes, Beckham, Gary Neville.
Yeah.
Robbie Savage would have been the same year.
Savage.
And would Phil have been the year below?
Phil was a couple of years below.
Okay. What year was Ben Thornley, your year?
Ben Thornley as well. Another John O'Kane.
Yeah.
Chris Casper.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, 8 of us actually signed professional contracts on the same day.
And did all the players you've just mentioned made first team
Yeah, they all played
starts for United, didn't they?
Yeah, every one of them.
Which obviously it's quite a phenomenal
Yeah,
achievement.
well, that's what I mean. You know, for 8 of the one age group to actually play first team.
And if you talk like nature versus nurture just for a minute, I mean, a couple of things which you said, I think as footballers, as people, you know, say if you belong, and did you know when you got in at that level, you felt like, right, I'm capable to perform and do well at this level? And then the second question I was going to say to you is, how much do you believe being in that environment kicked you on as a young player?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I think it helped everyone, the fact that we were such a fantastic side, you know, and we all made, you know, our appearances in the first team at different times, and we were all sort of very supportive of each other because we knew we were, you know, an exceptional side. But I think being part of that did help us all. You know, although we probably didn't realise it then.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there was times. I mean, we probably didn't realise how good we actually were at that time. But I remember the first team talking about, we were nicknamed the Dream Team, and you know, there was, you know, a lot of publicity about us from a very young age about how good we were, and you know, the manager talking about us, how good we could become. So you know, there was, you know, nice things said at an early age, because you don't sort of expect that type of publicity. You know, as a first year apprentice, you know, you're sort of getting in there and trying to do as best you can. But I think because of how good that team was, you know, there was more than you would normally get.
I think there's a couple of nice points, like you say there. I think it's key in not just football or life, but when obviously you've got good, healthy competition, it helps drive everybody on. Like maybe you're attacking a Gary Neville in training, you've got to be at top of your game. You're competing against Beckham. Or Beckham played more centre midfield, I think, as
central,
a kid.
Yeah.
But you got Giggs, who's a year above you. And I think what you said there, which is interesting for me, I mean, we've seen different environments that you all never worked against each other. You worked with each other. You were all positive for everyone to try and do well.
Yeah, exactly. You know, we all got our chance at different stages. You know, I think Nicky was probably the first one. I may have been the second one. And, you know, we were all delighted for each other because we knew we were all on the same journey. Because we were in that same side. You know, I mean, Giggsy was ready first team, you know, but was still eligible for the youth team.
Yeah.
You know, so he was playing first team and training first team every day, but, you know, still got dressed in the same dressing room as us. He didn't want to even go to the first team dressing room, you know, because we were all a year older. You know, he still had his year. He was second year, that he still had that year of friends, you know, and he was still very, very young. But no, it was crazy how quickly things happened for everybody.
What age? A couple of things I don't want to forget, because obviously Eric Harrison. How much was the coaching environment, would you credit, like I've heard others, to help you all progress through?
Oh, Eric was massive, and everybody who's part of that would say that. You know, he was a scary character.
Okay.
You know, when we used to play matches at the Cliff training ground.
Yeah.
The up the stairs was a big glass window where he would actually watch the game inside.
I wouldn't be down on the pitch.
But you would hear the window banging at times, and you would always have that sort of wee look up, and sometimes you would actually look up and wouldn't see him, and you knew he was on his way down to have a go at somebody, and he was terrifying, but we just loved working for him. And you know, I suppose he was rubbing his hands with glee, you know, at how good that
the raw
side
materials
was.
he had to work with.
Yeah, but the way he coached us and brought us through, you know, I mean, Alex Ferguson obviously done the work after that, but Eric was monumental in you know, the success of a lot of us.
And what age do you talking about getting to? You said about first team and youth team still doing jobs. We had a nice chat on the way here, but and it's much lesser at Walsall for me to you. What age did you get the call to going over and train on the first team pitch yourself personally?
No, I mean, I made my debut as a 17-year-old, so that was, quite surreal. In that a year and a half, I was a year and a half earlier. I was still at school, so to actually make my debut at that age. But I'd probably been in and around the first team at times. You would come in some days and you'd be training with the youth team, and then the next day you're training with the first team of the day, and then you maybe wouldn't train with them for another 3 days. You were sort of just introduced at different times, and that, I mean, when I made my debut, I'd probably been, travelled about 4 or 5 times previous to that,
right,
for games. And this is back when we had maybe, 2-3 subs. And you like to sort of introduce the players to that squad environment, and you would travel, but you wouldn't get stripped.
Yeah.
So I think it was just to give you that, experience of being in and around that environment, and in the round environment of a match day.
And just remind us all, in sort of guess, what sort of first team players are we talking about at that era of United that you were going into train with as a 16-year-old?
Yeah, well, I mean, when I made my debut as a 17-year-old, that was the FA Cup, and it's very different now with FA Cup. If you're playing a team lower down, there'll be, some teams change 10, 11 players. But I remember that night we played Bury at home, and it was Schmeichel in goals, Paul Parker, Bruce Pallister, Dennis Irwin. I think it might have been Phelan, Mickey Phelan, Brian McClare, Lee Sharp, myself, and Cantona and Hughes up front. So, if you sort of look at that team, I was the only one. It was a very, very strong side. And
did you score?
Yeah, I managed to put a cross in early doors for Mike Phelan. He scored a header, and then scored the second. So,
and did you know were your family there? Did you know you were going to play?
No, I trained on them. This was a Tuesday night game, and I trained on the Monday with the youth team, and we trained in the afternoon. I remember doing like a bit of a doggy session at the end, running, and came in to get changed, and I got told I was in the squad for the game on the Tuesday night, and I thought, I'll be in the squad again, bit of experience. And I remember I was having a pre-match meal at the ground, and Paul Parker was sat opposite me, and the manager walked past me, and there was a doubt would Giggsy be fit, and Paul Parker says to the manager, is Giggsy fit? And he went no, and he turned around and pointed at me and said, sure, he can play. And that was
is that how you got told?
Yeah, that was how I got told. So, I mean, at that stage, 1993, no mobile phones, kickoffs in an hour and a half or whatever, or a couple of hours. So there was no time to let anybody know. So it's all.
What did they read on the teletext you'd scored?
I think my dad was at work that evening, and I think the game was on the radio or something,
right, okay.
and somebody had heard that it was playing or something. I remember my sister saying that she listened to the commentary on Radio 5 or something, and obviously great then that I'd actually managed to score as well.
What an amazing experience
Yeah.
must be. To keep with the youth team, obviously James Morrison, who's our last guest, we spoke to him. Obviously he was lucky enough to play in 2 FA Youth Cups, and he lost one and he won one. But that team, was it 2 FA Youth Cups you played in 2 years? And
2, yeah.
Managed to win one of them?
Yeah, we got beat the following year by, a very good lead side with players who did go on and play first team.
But the first year you won, it was against...
We beat Crystal Palace the first year. The second year we were very disappointed to lose it, but it was just part of our development really still. We were very much big favourites to win that game, and the second leg of it was live on Sky. There was 30,000 at both legs of the final, so it was massive for us, that you're starting to all of a sudden play in front of these big crowds.
Yeah, so you won it actually as first years.
We won it as first
So
years.
the expectation with all of you at that level was to go and win the second year and win it back to back.
Yeah, exactly.
I only watched it, a young lad who didn't really do ace. I coached him at grassroots, and there's always something I feel about the FA Youth Cup. I went to watch West Brom quarterfinals of the FA Youth Cup against Man City the other day, but speaking to Mars, I only got to play like whether that be third, fourth round when I was at Walsall. But there's always been something about the FA Youth Cup, and like you've just said there, it drew some really big crowds, and there's not many. You've got it forever, haven't you? So you're one of those that have gone and won the FA Youth Cup as a young lad.
Exactly. I think the semi-final was against Spurs, and I'd sort of had a bit of a bad spell, and as you do when you're young, and I didn't play in the semi-final, and I didn't play in the first leg of the final. I was just, you sort of lose form, which back then you can't understand it, but that's just what happens to young players. But the semi-final, you had Nicky Barnby and Saul Campbell and
Darren
Caskey, so they were a really good side, but we'd blown them apart, so we had, and then the final we won the final, but it was disappointing the following year. But I don't think it's you look back on it, and obviously you want to win, but that was probably our first big real disappointment where we were expected to win this, and it probably, you didn't realize at the time, but it probably did help you in the long run, because it's always said you have to go through some bad
bit
things.
Resilience, adversity.
Exactly.
Mick Halslow's done the podcast. He's a bit of a mentor of mine. I always had this saying, win or learn.
Yeah.
Don't lose. And even though at the time I used to think, I look at it now and I was like, right, he's so valid.
Exactly, yeah.
Like you've said, whether I'm not saying by any means people have been sloppy, but sometimes you can't win everything. And actually for young footballers, which we can speak about, a bit of failure is good.
Yeah, of course.
A bit of failure, we say, make you refocus, be resilient. Why didn't we do that? Because obviously, I know we're going to talk about moving forward from that, but it's not too many years after that some of that team were winning the Premier League,
Exactly. 95, I think it was then, where you had Beckham and Scholesy playing regularly, Nicky Butt, Gary Neville. Giggsy was obviously already playing regular, but as you say, sometimes, when you do lose, I think you just need to learn, whereas you probably don't realise back then, but as you said, as you get older, it is very valid.
Yeah. So, look, bringing it up to there and to Man United, you got into the first team, and let's talk proper pro football now. You're obviously a very exciting young player at the biggest club, one of in the country in Europe. And did you see the Newcastle move coming?
No. It came completely out of the blue. Because I was doing really well that season. I scored my first goal in the league for United against Newcastle, ironically. I'd played against Newcastle 4 times that season.
Right.
We played them in the tournament at Ibrox in pre-season. And I'd done really well. And then I played them in a testimonial game for Billy Bingham in Belfast.
Right.
And then I can't remember what the cup was called that year. It changed all the time. Coca-Cola or whatever it was. Played against them at St James's. And then 3 days later I come off the bench and scored when we beat them 2-0. So I'd done really well, every time that I'd played against them. And that time was, European, I think it was the Champions League. It might have been the Champions League then, but, they had that rule about you could only have so many foreigners,
So would you have been classed at that?
I was a foreigner.
I
was a foreigner, and when you looked at what we had, Schmeichel, foreigner, Dennis Irwin, foreigner, Mark Hughes, foreigner, Cantona, foreigner, Keane, foreigner, Kanchelskis, foreigner, You know, that was littered with foreigners, so they really needed to get an English striker in. And the way the story goes was Alex Ferguson had inquired about Cole, and I think he was told no chance. And then I think he tried again, and Kevin Keegan had said only if he could get me. So we were playing in a game away at Sheffield United in the FA Cup, and I'd played in the previous league game. We beat Coventry at home, and I thought I was going to play again. I'd done well. So turned up to the game, team announced, subs announced, and I wasn't involved. So Alex Ferguson, you know, pulled me aside and explained the situation. Never once did he put pressure on me or anything like that. He just said, look, have a think about it, and I'll speak to you after the game. So I was watching the game with Ben Thornley, and the manager said not to mention anything. So I found a way of bringing the topic on to Newcastle, and you know, Ben was saying good things about a great club and all that there. So I'd made my mind up, you know, because I still had Andrei Kanchelskis at United at the time as well. Right. You know, he was a fantastic player. So I'd made up my mind that I would go and speak to Newcastle. So spoke to...
How old were you at this age, Keith?
19.
19. Did you have an agent?
No.
Did you speak to mum and dad? Or?
No, well, what happened, myself and Alex, I'd said, yeah, I would go and speak to Newcastle. So I went, myself and Alex first, and went to meet Kevin Keegan, who was at the game that night. Went to meet Kevin Keegan, Freddie Fletcher and Freddie Shepherd, the chairman. So we met them in a hotel, but when we got to the hotel, no mobile phone. So manager said, you know, ring your mum and explain the situation. So he came on the phone as well and explained to my mum, and you know, asked her for her permission. You know, could he do the contract for me, the negotiations? So she was happy enough with that. So ended up he acted as my agent on that.
Is that quite surreal in the modern day? I've read in your book that you said Sir Alex definitely looked after you.
He did, yeah, because he told a few porkies. And
got you wage up.
He did. He told a few porkies, but
in the modern day, that just wouldn't happen, would it?
Not a chance. Not a chance. You know, none of us that class, and none of us had agents at that time. And when we did sign our professional contracts, that was put in front of us, and we all signed the same contract. It wasn't like, no, I want this, I want that. It was put there.
You know what? I can't even try and compare, but exactly. We had 5 of the U team at Walsall sign a first year pro, and it was literally on the table. It was 250 quid a week. There was no bartering. It was like, I know it's probably a bit different at United, but back then it was like, right, you've progressed. We've been part of your development. There's your contract.
No, well, we signed ours in sort of the January, 6 months before the apprenticeship was up. But we actually gone on £230 a week on the January, and then in the summer, because we'd all signed 4.5 year contract. In the summer, it went up from £230 a week to £250 a week.
Must have jumped quick. Maybe that was my 3rd year contract. There's no way we were getting paid more at Walsall. It was a few years after you. But just before, obviously we go to the Newcastle to encapsulate the United thing. You talked, I don't want to forget about that. Who was your boot boy, was you?
I cleaned boots for Lee Sharp.
Lee Sharp, who's a local lad.
Yeah.
You said it's gone now at the game.
Yeah.
You think it should still?
I do, yeah. It keeps you grounded.
Yeah.
And I know when we used to do jobs, and you get into the first team dressing room and you're sweeping, cleaning the dressing room, and you have to wash the manager's car, and just as I said, that does keep you grounded. I think young players just get too much too soon now.
Yeah.
And you're getting in that dressing room and sweeping up and that, and it's in your head, you're going, this is where I want to be.
Yeah.
Whereas, as I say, they get everything.
So you're going from winning the FA Youth Cup to cleaning the gaffer's car?
Yeah, we're still, doing that for 2 years. And we won the Youth Cup the first year, but we're still doing all our jobs that we have to do. And I just think they're lifted and laid too much and get given far too much too soon.
Yeah, very good point. That's why I wanted to bring it up, because I actually enjoyed it. I've spoke to so many previous players. Look, there were certain aspects that would go too far, maybe with that boot room scenario with the first team and different scenarios in different clubs. But overall, it taught you some core values. And even though it was a bit of pressure, you got a connection to the first team, didn't you?
You did,
and that's
yeah.
that's what I enjoyed. I mean, I had 85 Ash, who's now been on this podcast, and he was known as Happy. He was an intimidating guy, but I had to sort of connect with Viv, and it built my character. I was a young first year, and all of a sudden I've got Viv as my boot boy, and everyone's like, "Oh God, Viv's a nightmare," and I didn't find him that actually.
Yeah.
And Viv then would connect with me. I remember watching
exactly.
training once. He went, "Do this." But it meant more coming from Viv than you know what I mean? It really connected me with him.
Of course, I agree totally. And a lot of times, you didn't have much sort of as a first year correspondence with, the first team. But, you would have had it, as you say, with your boot boy, because, it was great at Christmas, you got that wee Christmas tip,
Well,
because
Sharpie was a good lad, wasn't
he? Yeah.
Tough, yeah.
No, Sharpie was good. He wasn't mean. Some boys, other boys maybe wouldn't have got as much, but Sharpie was great. But yeah, you had that correspondence, and you were like, "Oh wow, I'm Lee Sharpie, our first teamer." I'm speaking to.
It must be, obviously. We'll speak about it now, because you've played for two of the huge. I know you've played for plenty of big clubs, but obviously you've built through at United. It must have come at a real shock. But before you know it, at 19, you're at Newcastle with Kevin Keegan, part of that sort of real push. How did that feel as all of a sudden you've gone from Northern Ireland, you've done really well at Man U, and you're clearly going there to be an established or be a first team player, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, that was part of the reason that then I thought about the Newcastle move. I thought, well, I could get real regular first team football here. And I mean, they had Real Fox, who they just bought for big money. He was a right
was
side.
a Norwich winger.
Yeah,
I remember.
So they had bought him maybe a year before that. So I knew that was going to be difficult. But when I actually did sign and did start playing Fox, he started playing the left and I played on the right. But I just thought, it was a great opportunity of playing week in, week out for somebody like Kevin Keegan to really insist. Because I know myself, if I said no, that I wasn't leaving Man United, the transfer was off, and Andy Cole would not have went to Man United. So, despite being a United fan, I think you just got to be selfish then and think about yourself and your future. And I thought, well, Kevin Keegan, somebody like him really maintaining that, if he didn't get me, he wasn't letting Andy Cole go. So he made me feel special.
Yeah.
And he done that this whole time he was there.
Was that feeling there when you met him before you signed? And he's a charismatic. I've been at one dinner where he's very charismatic guy, isn't he?
He's incredible. I had probably a 30-second conversation with him before going in, to sort the contract out. And he sold the club to me in 30 seconds. It's crazy. And anybody who's actually played under him, unless you have played under him, you some people might question that, going, what, 30 seconds really? Honestly, anybody who played under him will say exactly the same thing. And even when you had team talks before a game, you would maybe have 3 minutes. Team talks can be a bit mundane, you're going over set pieces, but you really know where you are in set pieces beforehand, but they just go over them and they can go on a little bit. Kevin Keegan's team talk was like 3 minutes long, and then his big strength then was going around the dressing room, and he would put an arm around you and he would make you feel like the best player in the world. And as a winger, because a winger is a real confidence possession, because running with the ball and you lose it, and you run and you lose it. And he give you that where I don't care if you run at him and lose it 9 times in a row. That 10th time, you put the ball in and we'll score. And That's what you want to hear.
So, I mean, it's really interesting. We'll get to that. You've been with a lot of decorated managers, and obviously Sir Alex is Sir Alex. Is Keegan a real motivator?
Yeah.
It makes you believe in yourself even more than you do already.
Like, to have that trait, you know, I've never seen anything like it. You know, I remember the 95-96 season, you know, before the season started, he was adamant, you know, we're challengers this season. And none of us felt like we were. We just brought in Les Ferdinand and Ginola, Warren Barton, Shaka Hislop.
I was going to ask you where you were in that cycle of signing all. What were the players already in when you got there?
When I got there, you know, you had, you know, Pavel Sarachek was goalkeeper.
Yeah.
You know, you had the local lads, Lee Clark and Steve Watson. Philippe Albert had already signed. Steve Howe was there. Darren Peacock, John Beresford, Rob Lee, Peter Beardsley. We had Scott Sellers was there, Paul Kitson. And then in the summer we went and got Shaka Hislop, Warren Barton, Les Ferdinand and Ginola.
Yeah.
And Keegan, you know, said, you know, we're going to be challenging, and I don't think any of us like believed him. And we won our first 5 games, and then we sort of maybe thought maybe we are here. Yeah. You know, and I mean, obviously we didn't in the end, but we took it down to the last day of the season. But you know,
and did you play a lot of games that?
I played. I think I was involved in maybe 32 or 34 of the 38. I missed a few injured. So I was a regular up until December, just Boxing Day. I got injured at Old Trafford and was out for about 6 weeks. So that sort of derailed me a little bit.
Do you know, it was a really interesting point, because obviously you've got a really decorated career, so we want to speak about that, but we talk about like youth and development. I've tried to say this to a lot of coaches: don't pass the player out of the player, if that makes sense. Now, you are traditionally a winger, dribbling, on the ball. I get that a lot when you've got young players where they don't pass. And I say, well, I don't really want that type of player to pass.
Yeah, exactly.
I want him. He's the game changer. So you're going to have to suffer him a little bit.
Yeah.
Because if Messi, I read a stat once that Messi loses the ball 4 out of 10 dribbles. If that's the best dribbler ever, and he's nearly 1 in 2 going to give it away, then little Billy's going to give it away.
Yeah, exactly.
But if he's going to be that type of player, I'm going to be the player who passes to him. He'll be the player who'll frustrate, but he'll win us the game.
Yeah.
So did you... I think you've definitely had that at Keegan. Was it with Eric Harrison? But from a young age, did you realise what you were?
Yeah.
And it was like, this is what I am.
Yeah.
That's how I'm going to play.
Yeah. I mean, I was very lucky, and I was blessed with pace.
Yeah.
You know, and to be a winger, you know, it's a big asset to have. And I wasn't a player who had tricks or like step. I had a really good drop of the shoulder, you know, that way, to go that way. And most fullbacks I was quicker than, so if there was space in behind and I knocked it, you know, 10, 15 yards past them, I knew I was getting to it first, you know. And I think
do you know one thing you did have, before I forget, and obviously Pete, who does the podcast from Circle Media, you had a phenomenal cross. Did you work hard on that, or did you?
It's funny because people actually say to me that when I actually crossed the ball, it was like a sliding cross, because I always ended up on the deck as I crossed it.
So how fast you running?
Yeah, and I must have perfected this sort of sliding cross, you know, because I did always end up on the deck. But yeah, I mean, you do practice, you know, crossing, and that was something that, you know, Kevin Keegan's training was exceptional. Everything was fast tempo all the time, but it was like 5-a-sides a lot of the time. But he would work on you. You know, individually, you know, he would say to me after training, right, I want to do this one, you know, in terms of getting the ball more, you know, trying to make space to actually receive the ball, and he would do stuff like that with you. So it was very important still, you know, because I was only 19 going there, and I was still developing really. And
do you know what's one really? I mean, it's interesting to see your view on it. Ball mastery is huge with the young kids now. Like a lot of. I'm not criticising, like there'd be a lot of coaches via Instagram and everything else. A lot of like tricks and through cones. And I've always said, I think you should master the ball young to be able to then master the game down the line.
Yeah.
But I think if you go and watch top level, it's really interesting. You're one of the most exciting wingers around. I remember someone saying to me, at the top level, it's perfecting a few things. It's not, you weren't rouletting someone every week or doing a Maradona skill. You've got a drop the shoulder. I mean, Beckham never even took someone on all the time.
No,
and if you look at Giggsy, he was quite direct.
Yeah.
So your thing there, which I think is a really good thing for the kids, is like develop what you're good at and perfect that.
Exactly.
It's not got to be an over technical skill base if you can get the end result.
Yeah, as a winger, your job is to get the ball in the box, and in 1995, Les Ferdinand's in there. He thrives on crosses. He had Janol on one side, myself on the other. If I'm not like doing my job getting crosses in, I'm not in the team. So you're gonna continually keep doing what you're good at.
Yeah.
You don't want to complicate things. So I'm not going to try and do a step over and try and beat him when I know that what I'm doing already with a drop of the shoulder is effective anyway.
Yeah.
And with having that pace, if they are then like showing you that they're showing you inside, if you've got the pace within your head, I can actually get inside them and then cut across where I'm still crossing it with my right foot. And that's what I'm saying. I was quick, and you've got to utilize that. And
in fairness, if you look at that now, I mean, I was watching that time. If he signed you in Ginola, he wants balls in the box. He's signed two wingers. Obviously, Ferdinand, and we'll talk about it. Shearer's sort of come later. And before I forget that you played with Beardsley. It was literally one of my favourite ever players. So it'll be interesting when we do the five-a-side team. Now I realised Beardsley was in there as well. He had that little skill that supposedly, I forget what it was called, but they even studied that at Barcelona.
Yeah.
He had that little shuffle on the ball.
And it was like, it was one of those you knew he was going to do it, but still couldn't stop it. Because he always did it, and he was phenomenal.
Well, look, brilliant so far, Keith. We're going to take a tiny quick break.
Yep.
When we come back, we're going to obviously discuss your career after Newcastle, a bit of international, and obviously what you're doing now in terms of the agency and your thoughts on youth football.
Okay.
So thank you so far.
No worries.
Right. Just to recap, we've got to the point of you regular in Newcastle's high-flying, sort of exciting team under Keegan. I think Terry Mack was the coach, was Arthur Cox around that period. I was just saying off camera to Pete before we come back on, I can't forget to speak. That's now a period you're playing European football. I can't forget, and I know the Geordies who come on, that brilliant evening playing against Barcelona. We've all got games that we'll look back on and say, right, that was one of my best ever games. Is that the best game or right up there for you, Keith?
Without a shadow of a doubt. And the fact that it was our first ever game in the Champions League as well.
Right, okay.
We were in a group with, it was Barcelona, PSV Eindhoven and Dynamo Kiev. So first ever game, home to Barcelona, Figo and Rivaldo, Luis Enrique.
I was just going to ask you for the name drop of who they had.
They had a really good side. Well, you expect that anyway. It's Barcelona. And the little left back, Sergi, was the Spanish left back. But, back then, 97, I don't think we really got the coverage that we got in later years, on Sky of Spanish football.
Yeah.
So I didn't know too much about him. But as I mentioned before, the one thing you want to do the first time you get the ball is test the fullback, see how quick he is. And I knew early doors that I had him. And, fortunately for me that night, I put in two balls for Tino Esprilla. He scored a penalty for the first one. And obviously we're like 3-0 up after about 50 minutes, against the mighty Barcelona. And I mean, they did come back and Luis Enrique scored, and then Figo scored, and it was a bit of a tense finish. But I think if we were to have sort of drawn that game, it would have been an absolute travesty. It was just one of those nights where everything went right. I'm in Newcastle quite a bit, and it's a game that a lot of people remember, a lot of people talk to me about, and it's great for me, looking back, because if you want to look back and go, somebody goes, what was the best game you ever played? Who was it against? I'm lucky. I can say it's against
Champions League Barcelona.
Yeah. So,
and did you swap shirts or keep shirts?
No, I didn't even swap.
I'm really
shirts.
into memorabilia.
I sort of wish you had it back then, but
have you kept your own?
I think I've given it away. I've give shirts away, charity over the years, and I've probably got about 3 or 4 shirts today.
Some players are not. Now, just interesting you say there, because obviously I've seen it on what's the TV show that Henri and everyone's on, and they asked for a bit of a name drop on who they'd swap shirts with, and he actually swapped it with R9 in the World Cup final.
Oh, right.
Just like you win.
Yeah.
But you've just talked about like Rivaldo, Figo, but also you've had an exceptional game. So I just wondered, one, had you swapped shirts?
Yeah.
And 2, had you kept your own? But look, it's sort of, I remember seeing highlight reel of it before, and it's something, like you say, with great sort of honour, if you want to call it that. You'll go back and reminisce about that with the Newcastle fans, because most of us will have a good game, but to have a good game in the Champions League against Barcelona is... Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it's a game that everybody around that period, Newcastle and even later, will remember, because it's their first game, and because you're playing against one of the European giants, and to beat them. I mean, the performance that night was very much a Kevin Keegan type performance, but it was actually Kenny Dalglish was the manager that night.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, so it was Kenny was the manager. So we had a lot of experience on that side that night, because
and Shearer come in by then.
Shearer was injured,
right?
But we had like Stuart Pearce, and we had John Barnes played that night. Rob Lee was experienced. It was just Philippe
Albert. Saying they were playing me in the reserves, mate. Later, Pearce and Barnes somehow. What a night, what an experience for you. And did you, before I forget, because you really spoke so highly about Keegan, and before we move on, was you shocked when he left?
Yeah, totally. And I feel, I feel cheated, because I only got him for 2 years.
Right.
You'd have played for him your whole career.
Yeah.
He was that good, and he had such an infectious character. Him and Terry had a great relationship. There was always a lot of fun in training. And we were serious when we had to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was. It was a shock, and I mean, I never really understood the politics behind it. I'm not sure, whether Kevin was promised things or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think a lot of people would say that Kevin was one of those who would maybe throw the toys out of the pram.
I was just going to say he's an emotional character, but he is, isn't he? He wears his heart on his sleeve.
Yeah, and I mean, everyone will remember the rant that night, and looking back, I mean, even at the time, I loved that, because you could see the passion, and not many people, even when I signed for Newcastle, and obviously I wasn't a direct replacement for Andy Cole, but Andy Cole was pure gold at that stage, and Newcastle fans couldn't understand why Kevin Keegan was selling him, but he came out onto those steps of St James's Park, and you can see that Newcastle fans are not happy. But within 5 minutes, he had said to them, "Look, I know the implications, but you've got to stick with what I want to do."
Yeah. And
within 6 months, we brought in Les Ferdinand, and we brought in Ginola, and Les was exceptional at the club, but the fans, after 5 minutes, they backed down, and they were with him. He had them with him, Was that obviously you played, because we want to talk about youth development, and you've obviously played after that. Not let me get it wrong, for Blackburn, Leicester, Sheffield United. Played nearly 600
games, Keith, across the span, which is amazing. Would you say that Newcastle was your best time as a player?
100%. And a lot of sort of people, you know, I go back to Newcastle. A lot of people actually don't realise I left Newcastle when I was 23. You know, so I was still very, very young, and I just came a little bit disillusioned with the club because the club had offered me a new 4-year contract, and I was looking sort of better terms, but I was approaching the last year of my contract, and all of a sudden I got a phone call to say Middlesbrough were in for me, and the club had agreed that I could go and speak to them, and I thought, all right, fair enough. So I went down to speak to them, and Kenny Dalglish was the manager. I got back home, and then the following night I got a phone call from Brian Robson to say I'd failed the medical. So I phoned Kenny Dalglish, and the day before, Kenny was on Sky. It was a tournament down at the Riverside, Newcastle, Middlesbrough, I think Fiorentina, another team. But I was injured, but he was asked about me leaving in his post-match interview, and he knew nothing about it, and it made him look quite stupid, obviously. But I remember phoning him on the Sunday night to say, oh, bad news, I failed the medical, and Kenny went, it's not bad news for me, you're still in my plans, which was great. But the club then, because I'd failed the medical on an ankle injury, I'd missed the cup final previous to that, and I'd come back and I was still struggling, and I hadn't realised there was a broken talus in my foot, and it can be a dodgy enough injury, but I was told that there'd be a full recovery. But the chief executive had gone to the press and put this out that I might never play again. You know, which, you know, this was my livelihood, and so I was not happy with that. So it was hard to sort of see a way back. But the club actually took the 4-year contract off the table and said, we'll offer you a 1-year contract because at least that's guaranteed. You know, so
things changed.
So I'd lost the, you know, I was a little bit disillusioned with things, and 6 months later I did leave and go to Blackburn then.
But you still have amazing, we just spoke then, amazing memories and fondness for the area, your time there.
Oh, I love the place. I mean, I'm there. You know, I was there 2 weeks ago at the Nottingham Forest game, the 4-3 there, and I'm over next weekend. I'm doing a thing on the cup final day in Newcastle.
Okay.
With fans, so I did that a couple of years ago when they were in the final. Yeah, I did it a couple of years ago when they were in the final. So hopefully it's a better result for them.
Yeah, of course. Well, good luck to the Geordies, like you say, in the final. In terms of like international, I just want to touch on that. We talk about youth development, 80 plus games for your country. Must be a real proud moment. Without forgetting, I put it on their flyer. I said, known as Bestie as a kid.
Yeah.
You got to play with him in one charity game.
Did.
One thing as a kid, talk about pressure of that, being called Bestie for someone who's so phenomenal. And then the pride in sort of playing all those games for your country.
Yeah, you know, I never really took...
Was it just tongue in cheek? Really?
Yeah. And then, I mean, it just, you know, I get a lot of people still call me it now. But I can think of worse nicknames. You know, I suppose I was probably... I mean, it was more in later years. It wasn't as a kid.
Right.
It was more actually when I went to Blackburn. It was Chris Sutton actually started calling me it.
Right.
And it stuck from there. And I think it's probably more for what I did off the pitch rather than on the pitch. Yeah, no, I mean, as I say, played in a testimonial with him, and you know, just to be in the dressing room with him and see him up close was you know, incredible, because he's such an icon.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, we're a really small nation, and we're very, very proud of, because we as a nation, I think we do. You know, we do have these top sportsmen over the years. You know, with You know, if you're talking Rory McIlroy or you're talking George Best, Alex Higgins, you know, Barry McGuigan, you know, we've had a lot of top sportsmen over the years, and we're very, very proud and, you know, patriotic about, you know, where we come from because we're such a small nation.
No, brilliant. And in terms of your international career, like 80 plus games, just quickly, any countries you played against, memories that stand out for you?
Yeah, you know, 2000 and it's 20 years this September where we beat England at Windsor Park. David Healy scored. You know, that was an England side with, you know, Beckham played, Owen played, Rooney played, Lampard, Gerrard, Wright Phillips, I think, was playing. Luke Young was the fullback. Ashley Cole, Paul Robinson. I think Matthew Upson maybe was one of the others. But, so it was a strong side.
Yeah.
They'd already beat us 4-0 in the first game at Old Trafford. We'd actually done really well. We were 0 each at half time and we ended up losing 4. But, you know, for us that night, we were sort of thinking, if we lose 1-2-0, it's pretty much seen as a victory. Yeah. So for us to beat them that night was incredible. And then we fast forwarded nearly a year to the day. You know, the game against England was September the 7th. September the 6th the following year, we played Spain at home. A Spanish side with, you know, Torres and Casillas, Puyol, Iniesta was on.
We're talking about the midfield three of Barca.
Well, Iniesta was on the bench.
Oh, right.
Who else played? Gosh, they had all the big names.
Yeah.
Sort of just got out of my head. David Villa. Xavi. And we ended up beating them 3-2 that night.
God, amazing.
David Healy scored a hat-trick. We went 1-0 down. We went 2-1 down. You know, that made it even more special. You know, going 1-0 down early on, Xavi had scored, and you're thinking, oh, it could be a long night here. And then we equalised, and then second half, David Villa scores, and we equalise again, and then we get the third one. And that Spanish side then went on and won. So it was 2006. They went on and won the Euros, World Cup Euros, and they actually didn't lose a game for the next 3 years.
After the game?
After we'd beaten them, you know. So for
us,
yeah, and that was an incredible campaign for us because we came so close to actually qualifying. We came third in our group, and the group was so difficult. We had Spain, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Latvia, and ourselves. So there was actually 7 in the group, and we beat Spain at home. We beat Sweden at home. We beat Denmark at home. We beat Latvia at home. We beat Liechtenstein at home, and we lost to Iceland at home 3-0 5 days before we went and beat Spain. And we even had good results away. Drew away in Denmark, drew away in Sweden.
Right.
Beat Liechtenstein, but we lost to Spain 1-0 away, and we lost to Iceland and Latvia away. And if we had won one of those games, we would have qualified.
You'd have been through.
Yeah.
Amazing to beat those sort of couple of teams.
Yeah, you know, I mean, you think about how hard that group is, because Scandinavian countries are, you know, difficult.
And before I forget, because it just makes me reflect, when we did the last podcast with James Morris, and I said to him, look, he said about levels of you play like Premier League and then you go and play the international stage, and he spoke about levels, about playing against people. We played Germany. He said about to play against Cruz and Schweinsteiger. I played that Spanish trio.
Yeah.
In terms of yourself, you've played top Premiership and then you've played international. Who would you say were the sort of top couple of defenders you come up against that you were like, right, okay?
I think that.
Did you play against an Ashley Cole in his peak?
I was just going to say that he was probably, you know, because for me, when he was playing, he was the best in the world.
Yeah.
He was, because he was quick, and, you know, I said to you about having pace, and I never really got the better of him. And he played that night when we beat England. So he would have been, you know, the best of them for me. You play against certain fullback. Playing against some nations, you're getting into games and you're not knowing anything about these guys. But with Ashley Cole, you actually knew that night you were going to be up against a top player. But as I say, to actually beat England that night with the side that they had was an incredible result.
So it's interesting with Ashley Cole, so I think I'm quite correct. If we talk a bit about sort of youth development, Ashley Cole was a winger, I think, as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And we spoke off air about that. I think you said you went right back a little bit later in your career, and when you went back to Ireland, played centre mid. But in the modern game now, a couple of things I was going to ask you. Wingers are not always as prevalent as there was. So would it be different for a Keith Gillespie growing up now? And how do you see that advancement now? Because obviously a lot of modern wingers are sort of hybrid. They're like fullbacks as well now. Do you see that? Did you think your development would have been different? And how do you see that?
Yeah, I think so. Because, you sort of look at wingers now, they call it inverted wingers, right footer playing on the left and vice versa. And, you're cutting in. But, with that era that I had, and, you sort of look at football now and you sort of think, well, where's the big strikers? Your Shearers, your Ferdinands, your Chris Suttons, who thrive on balls into the box. Man City have Haaland in the middle, but they don't generally put a lot of balls into the box. And I think that the days of wingers are pretty much gone for me. Out and out wingers who want to get to the byline. You don't see that type of football an awful lot now. And you mentioned the fullbacks who pretty much play as wingers now.
Yeah.
And it's the way the clubs play now. It's important that back when you were a fullback, your job was defend. You do that. And that's your job done. That's not the case now, and you look and people talk about, Trent Alexander-Arnold. They go, well, he's not the greatest defender, but what he gives them going forward negates, maybe that he isn't.
And thinking about that, because we spoke before, obviously the way the FA will change it even more. Like kids won't play. If you look at the format, they won't play 11v11 until they're 14 in about 18 months. So that would then, normally when people are playing 9v9, they're not really playing with wingers. So that format is normally like a 3-3-2, or they're not playing without net wingers. So that might affect it even more.
Yeah.
And the fact kids can't head the ball, it's quite interesting in the way it's changed nowadays, that the kids can't head a ball to a certain age. And I said that my lad, when he was at Walsall Academy at 13, 14, couldn't head a ball. He'd gone through the period of never heading a ball.
Yeah.
So when it got to the stage, so like you say, more and more with the development of football, it may change the game with the wingers, with big strikers, just in terms of the formats and the way it's laid out for everyone. It might really change.
Yeah, I think they want to change things too much.
Yeah.
We never had any of this when we were growing up. It was throw the ball down and go and play. I think they try and it's too technical now. And certainly, not playing 11v11 until you're 14. I find it difficult to get my head around that. Because I grew up, playing in primary school football, being 8 years of age, and I was playing 11v11 at 8 years of age. So for them to be 14, and you're saying, you spoke about wingers, 9v9, as you say, no wingers at all, and I think the thing about wingers have always been, people who will get the fans onto that edge of the seat. And it's strange as a winger sometimes, and I knew I was having a good game, and you're like, give me the ball, and you keep, but when I got it, you can near enough feel them, over your shoulder, like just going forward that little bit, because they know that you're going to be direct, and there's no better sight at times of a winger who is absolutely flying down the wing. And I think it's a shame the way the game has gone that, we don't really have that, very often at all.
Yeah, look, I mean, really good friend of mine who played at Walsall, John Hodge, I'm not saying you'd remember the name, but he was an out-and-out winger. There was Scott Houghton, who come to Walsall, had been at Tottenham. And we had, back in the day, 2 out-and-out wingers. They got everyone off the seat, but you knew what they did. And I only, speaking to Hodgie recently, was like, don't see him. So obviously you are that at Premier League level, so it'll be interesting how it develops in terms of player development, because I think they've done it for players with ball development, but a lot of, like you say, the game changers, as I call them, I would have called you a game changer, is that player needs to just be unstructured, be natural, work it out, but they've got to go and do it. They can't all of a sudden become a winger at 15. They've got to be that dribbler putting the crosses in. You've got to be doing it more than for 18 months before you go into scholarship. So it'll be interesting how it develops.
I mean, growing up, wingers you're pretty much off the cuff, aren't you? When you get the ball, you either know how to sort of take a man on and have that directness and crossing. You have that, that's a talent you've sort of been given. It's quite hard to sort of teach that. It's there's that rawness of being a winger, and the directness of it. But I just think they want to just change things too much at times. Kids, it's certainly from a very, very young age, they can be overcoached then. Let kids go out and just enjoy the game. There's plenty of time for that to be, when you get that little bit older, to try and develop more.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because obviously bring it all the way forward now to modern day. You run your own agency with Brian and others, and obviously the landscape has definitely changed in terms of signing at 14 to then sign at 16. Kids can now sign from their 8th birthday and play for professional clubs. And we have, which can be questioned, I've seen recently on a different podcast that Liverpool had like an under-5 group, which they're Liverpool, but I sort of questioned it. Do you think there's too much too young now, Keith, from what you see?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you talk about being under 5s and all. I mean, it's very difficult then, because they're not all going to make it. That leads to more heartache at a younger age, because maybe by the time they're 8, they're seen as not good enough. And it's very difficult for, to deal with that disappointment at that young age, a little bit older. You're still disappointed, but you have a little bit more, in your head about things. But, I went across at 16. At 14, I couldn't sign till I was 14. No.
But you must have seen lots of top players get affected or not get to where you got to. There must have been kids you've seen at Man U School of Excellence, 14, even at 14, 15, 16, who were top kids at that age, who didn't make one professional appearance.
Yeah, exactly. I think anybody who actually played professional football, they'll always say about the ones that they sort of grew up with, and when you were back at that time, you were like, oh, they'll definitely make a player, so will they. And everybody will always know 3, 4 that actually didn't. And at that time, you'd be like, no, they'll definitely, be a player there.
So to move it forward to the modern day, obviously, I think it's really key, hopefully, like our guest, I know they'll take loads from it, but you're speaking there about the way you played. It was unstructured. You had to play free. Coaches who gave you that belief. So you're talking, obviously, everyone knows who Kevin Keegan is, but even if we bring it down to grassroots, I always say to coaches, like, kids need someone to believe in them. They need a little bit of hope, not be afraid to fail. You've really re-emphasised that, even at the top level. I mean, you'd have had someone like Keegan would have gone, go and take him on again.
Yeah.
Go and take him on again. Go and do it. And then you've obviously had that through your youth team. You're talking about learning from failure in the youth team, the FA Youth Cup, and all the different elements, which I think a load of our coaches, hopefully, parents and players will get benefit from, bringing it forward to the modern day. Because I don't think it's essential that everyone who's in the game's got to have played.
No.
You've got so many talk about experience than experiences, and I think you've got both.
Yeah.
So talk it to the modern day of you with your agency now. I think it's probably a bit of mentorship, isn't it, as well? With looking after these young lads with all the experiences you've got.
Yeah, well, I suppose my role in it, the fact that I've sort of been there, got the T-shirt. I've made mistakes along the way, and if any of our young players, need somebody to talk to, they know, I'm just at the end of a phone. And we do have, with Brian, who works alongside me, who is very hands-on with the young players, and, is in contact with them constantly. And that's very rare, with agents, because, back when I played, I was, had a bad experience with an agent, but the agent that I actually ended up with became a lifelong friend. And I think it's important when you are an agent that you build that trust up where, not only, them trusting us, but, vice versa. It is important that you have that. It's important that you're not just an agent who gets on the phone when there's a contract to be done.
Yeah.
Doesn't speak to the player for 6 months. We're very, very much hands-on because I was a player, I can understand what the player wants in an agent.
Yeah.
So we try and deliver that.
No, that's brilliant to hear, because it was from, I think, West Brom. We used it was sort of, they did a statement about better players but better people. But I think you and Brian, obviously I know Brian and I've met to meet yourself, but you're a developer of people as well, aren't you? And you understand that. And I think from reading your book, which is different to this sort of podcast, but there's some real raw honesty in there. And you understand being in digs in Salford, being homesick, different things, that opportunities might not be the best to do, or when you're having, like you've said, that run of form. I read the rule of 3 recently, that it might be one good game, one okay, not one so good.
Yeah.
But if you want to play 500-600 games, you ain't playing 500 great.
Yeah.
So the balance of being a player to go, look, don't get too excited when you do great, and don't get too low when you have a stinker.
Yeah.
It's going to be, that going through, Moz spoke about, they put him to centre-back for a year. It's like what they're doing, got me to learn a different position. He had, is it Osgood Slatters? He had it. He had that growing pains. We can all plateau. So I think to have someone who's got, you don't have to just be footballers, but when you've got those experiences to go, look, you might have a ropey couple of months, you're still a great player, right? You've got a bit homesick. How do we do this?
Yeah.
Okay, look, the club are not treating you fairly there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to step in and support you.
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant to hear.
There's so many different roles to the agency side of things now, because you're speaking, especially when you've got young players, because you've got you're building up relationship with parents as well, because they have to have that trust in you. But then you're speaking to the parents all the time. You're speaking to the player. You're speaking to the club more often. Coaches, Back then it was like agents sort of, you spoke to them maybe after a game. You'd get a phone call. Oh, how'd you go last night? As I say, some agents probably wouldn't even bother to do that. But it is important that when they are having that tough time, because I know what it can be like, and if the young players are, I can say to them, look, this is normal. You cannot be an 8, 9 out of 10 every week. You're always, and especially young players, because you always do have that period where things don't go well. And
look, not just because you do it. There was someone who said in a recent thing, like a young player doesn't need an agent. Now I'm a dad of 2 lads who, one got close, one's playing reserves at Tamworth, which is still a good level. And I said, depending on environment, family, who they've got supporting them, I genuinely disagree. I think that there's so much, football's a real roller coaster. And like you've just said there, I think it was David Kelly who he said to say hello. He said to me once, I never forget it, the good times are easy, the hard times will define you. He said you need experience. I remember Ned saying that to me, and I thought, God, why didn't someone say that to me at 18? Why wasn't there? So I just think that sort of value back is brilliant for people like you, and hopefully I wish you and Brian all the success with it. You've been brilliant on this podcast, Keith. Now, look, you could top everyone. It depends who you do. I've got a few people that I remember you to play with, so it's interesting. We always do, at the very end of every podcast, every player's best 5-0 team. You can pick yourself. You've got to pick a keeper. And we'd like you to pick a sub so we can at least get 6 in. Mm-hmm. This is where Pete gets all creative on the screen and puts everybody on there. So I did tell you before, so hopefully you've had time to think about it. Who would be Keith Gillespie's best 5-a-side team?
Okay, goalkeeper, I would have to go with Schmeichel. I feel as if, from when the Premier League started, I still feel as if he has been the best.
Yeah.
There's been some great goalkeepers, and even now with the likes of Alisson and De Gea was great, but Seaman, but for me, Schmeichel, Shea Given was exceptional as well. So he would be my goalkeeper. This team's probably got a little bit of flair with. I'm not going with a real out-and-out defender. I'm going with Philippe Albert at the back, who had absolutely everything. An unbelievable left foot, and everyone remembers the chip. Exactly. It was, there's not many centre halves can actually score goals like that. They can, a centre forward could step into that and rifle it, but to have the cheek of,
he did it over Schmeichel.
He did as well, yeah, he did. So that's
some keeper to chip.
That was to make it 5 that day. Midfield would be Roy Keane. He hated losing, so he trained, especially 5-a-side, exactly like he would play in a match. Who would I have with him? I would have Scholesy, absolute magician. One of the best that I ever played with, and a lot of people say that, and for Zinedine Zidane to actually say it, you must have been some player. So Scholesy, I grew up with Scholesy from a young age, so I knew how good he was. Seeing some of the things he did in training was just incredible. And then up front, because it's a 5-a-side team, some of the strikers that I sort of played with over the years were terrible in training and 5-a-side. Shearer wasn't great. Mark Hughes, who was a hero of mine, was shocking in training. Les was a good trainer.
But I see, it's probably not a 5-0 player like some others.
Same, yeah. It was close to putting Tino in there, Asprilla, because he just had everything. It's his type of game, tight space and all. But I would have to go with Peter Beardsley.
Right, I thought you were going Cantona.
Well, Cantona was great too.
But Beardsley's
Cantona was one of the best ever played with. And I have actually said probably the best I played with. But Beardsley, he was an unbelievable trainer. Yeah. So much enthusiasm. Cantona was a great trainer too, but just the fact that 5-a-side, I thought Beardsley absolutely perfect. So I think Scholes and Beardsley would work together. On the bench, I would go for let me think. I'll probably have to go with Cantona. It's not a bad substitute to have there.
So you're not picking you don't need wingers on 5-a-side. You and Ginola are not getting in.
5-a-side, there's not enough space for me
No.
to sort of drop the shoulder and knock it past people. You know, it's a small side.
It could top all teams. Big shout out to David Batty, who I loved. He must have been
he was
close to it. But
yeah, exactly. I mean,
so many names.
It's a toss up there. You've got Roy Keane.
You'll never stop, will you? Some of the players you played with at the different clubs. But look, Keith, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no,
genuinely, someone of your sort of stature and what you've done in the game. Hopefully, people will have enjoyed the conversation, got some key insights. I think what's really nice is the type of player you are. Of what you've said, I always try and look at it and say what key takeaways have we got. And I think hopefully for me, for coaches and for players that are a little bit different, it's keeping that belief in yourself, playing free. And I always say to a lot of the coaches, those game changers, you've got to believe in them. You've got to suffer them sometimes. Let them go and fail, because they will be the ones that will win you the game, and they'll be different. And at the young ages, that's really key.
I must actually say, there's Harry Gregg, the great goalkeeper who was in the Munich air disaster. There's a Harry Gregg Foundation, and it's up in Coleraine where the Milk Cup was, and they've got thousands of kids. And Harry's name was put to that, and it's for all ages. And one thing he hated was, coaches walking about, coaching under 6 with clipboards. He says, any clipboards, take my name away from this. He says, let the kids play.
Oh, brilliant.
That was his philosophy, So as I mentioned before, I think there is overcoaching, especially at a very, very young age.
Well, what a brilliant way to finish. So, as Harry Gregg says, let the kids play. Keith, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Cheers. Thanks, Wayne.
Thank you.
Cheers.